we are here in New Waterford with Aaron Bragg. Aaron has been leading a lot of the charge here, talking to a lot of folks. He's someone who kind of was an early person talking about dioxin, all sorts of things like that. So first off, thanks for taking the time to meet with us. We really appreciate it. If you want to just start off, kind of get us up to speed on how you got involved. Obviously, New Waterford is one town over from East Palestine, so folks here are definitely being affected, but in different ways than folks in East Palestine. Obviously, the surrounding communities are all having an impact here. But if you want to just kind of get everyone up to speed on how you got involved with all of this stuff going on right now.
Sure. First off, I'd like to thank you guys for everything that you're doing and this opportunity to speak today. So how I got involved was Friday night, the night of the derailment. My wife and I were out. We had a night out away from the kids. We came out from the event that we were in, and we started getting text messages that half of East Palestine is on fire. So we started looking into seeing what was going on. We found out our tenant had posted a Facebook Live from her front window that says, "Oh my God, the railroad tracks are on fire." So really started getting very, very concerned at that point. We were like, oh my gosh, that's happening right in front of our house. So reached out to the tenant, told her, get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
Like, look, I don't know what's going on, but whatever's happening is bad. So I have a very, like almost a 30-year chemical background. So I made industrial gases for 15 years. Currently, I am a senior risk engineering specialist for a Fortune 500 property and casualty carrier. So with that being said, I understand combustion very, very well. And there was a lot of black smoke coming off. So my concern from the get-go was what is coming off of that smoke. So again, tried to get my tenant out of there. She did not really realize the gravity of the situation because there was a lot of miscommunication that was going on at first. Nobody really knew. So with that being said, stayed the next several days through Saturday and Sunday, very, very concerned about all the products that were coming off. And the stories started not adding up very, very quickly. So again, to go back into my background, I filled rail cars. So way back when, about 25 years ago, I filled rail cars. I had to do my own inspection on that rail car before I could even put product in it. Once I filled that product up, I had to reach out to Chemtrek. Mm-hmm. So on any hazardous material container going down the highway, the rails, Chemtrek is involved with that. So before the train would even hook up and pull my rail car away, I had to turn that manifest in to Chemtrek. So I knew within 30 seconds of this derailment happening that Chemtrek had to have been notified. Chemtrek is supposed to, the whole existence of their being is to let the first responders know what they're coming to fight. Okay. Right? And we didn't know what was on that train for 7 days.
Right. So, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but from folks that I've talked to, it sounds like firefighters who first arrived on scene were pouring water on the fire and trying to put it out, but in a lot of cases, water probably wasn't the right answer here. And if they had maybe known what was involved in the fire, they would have been using foam sooner or had different PPE on and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, our first responders did an amazing job saving leak oil, saving Ceram Fab. If it wasn't for our first responders, those buildings wouldn't be here. So. Yes, they needed to know. So the very next morning, we had a basketball game. Mm-hmm. One of the kids on my son's basketball team is a first responder from a local fire department. Mm-hmm. So there were 78 departments that came out, including Argon Oil Refinery sent their chemical team, mm-hmm. and Shell sent their chemical team. But at 12:30 that night, or a little bit before, so to go back to the story of the first responder, I seen him in the morning. He was haggard, right? He looked, and I knew that he had been out there the night before. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the other parents were coming to me because they know my background, and they were like, Aaron, what the heck happened last night? But I talked to this gentleman, the fire department, the first responder, and he said, Aaron, at 12 o'clock, they pulled us off because the benzene levels were too high. He's the only one to this day that I've heard benzene. So if you remember, they said that they were benzene residue cars.
Right. So there had been like emptied out cars, is what was said.
Right. But so a residue car, most your rail cars hold 30,000 gallons of product. Residue car can be 29,999 gallons. Mm-hmm. So as long as it's half of that cart, it can be considered residue.
Wow.
Now, with that being said, the likelihood of there being 29,000 are slim to none, because the end user is going to want to use most of that product. Mm-hmm. But how much was really in those cars? Mm-hmm. And to this day, we're still not hearing anything about benzene.
Wow. So this is a first responder on the scene, like a volunteer firefighter, it sounds like. And he was told that they were getting pulled away because the benzene levels were too high, meaning they were testing something with a device during that, but we haven't seen any of that information.
That's right. So, and it's one of the big questions that I keep asking all the time. So our fire department got $850,000 of new equipment because of contamination. Mm-hmm. What's the contamination?
Right.
Nobody has told us what that contamination was. So if they had to get all new equipment because of contamination, what the heck was going on in our town for those several days or even that day? The way that he described it was everybody responded. The EPA showed up, I believe, around 11 o'clock, or even the Norfolk Southern people with their analyzers, right? And then that's when they were like, oh gosh, unsafe, everybody get in your truck. So if you know, and that timeline coincides with everything else. Right. So at midnight, everybody was pulled off, and then Norfolk Southern has been in charge ever since.
Right. That's I guess one more question on that first responder. I mean, it sounds like if he's playing basketball with your son, this is a high school student, like, or is
no, these are seventh graders. Yeah, no, he wasn't playing basketball. He was just another parent there, watching the game.
Gotcha. Yes. Okay, I just wanted to clear that up. I was like, is this okay? Alrighty. I wanted to make sure. I was like, are you able to be a volunteer firefighter at 17, or is that something like that? Maybe, but okay, just wanted to clear that up. So at that point, then, this is all before the controlled burn as well, which was a whole other can of worms here. So this is just in the first couple days. Folks who had been exposed as first responders to the initial derailment and just inevitable things that were catching on fire as a result of that having the effects. At that point, then, the decision is ultimately made to do the controlled burn. The answers of who ultimately made that decision or why are still also, similarly to this, very wish-washy as to who made the decision. Personally, it seems like, there was some pressure from Norfolk Southern, obviously, to do this and try to, clear the scene of whatever is there as fast as possible. Partly, one, to not show necessarily everything that was there. That's a little bit of speculation. But number two, again, speculating a bit here, to have this mess moved out of the way so they could get the tracks up and running again and have folks running through town. I guess when all of that began to happen, again, with your background in some of this stuff, what were your thoughts when the decision was essentially made to set this all on fire?
Okay, so a very good question. So again, the first couple days, just trying to figure out what the heck was on these cars, what the heck is burning, what the heck is going on. When they first came out, and they have not said this exact word, boiling liquid, expanding vapor explosion, a bloody. So when they first came out, gosh, but that was Sunday or Monday, my timeline's a little messed up with that. I believe it was Sunday that they said, things are drastically changing on this car, and we need to evacuate the town. So my first thought was that, bloody. Okay, if that's a bloody, then you know what? They gotta get rid of this thing, because again, with my background, I had to study bloodies. I have to know how these things react. But I didn't know the product and how that product behaves in there. With that being said, when you have a refrigerated liquid, which this is vinyl chloride, when you typically relieve the pressure on a refrigerated liquid, it gets colder. It does not get warmer. So I had questions because I didn't know, I just don't know this product. I don't know how it behaves, but it's not adding up to me. If the pressure's relieving, this thing should be getting colder, not hotter. But my question was, they came out and said that this has to happen right away. but we already have the team up here from Louisiana ready to do this. They said that on Sunday before they even ready to blow this up. So I agreed with blowing up the cars because we're not calling this a controlled burn. It was an explosion, period.
But you think that explosion of some sort needed to happen, basically, or else something else was...
I thought that, but this is the statement that I've been saying since day one. Nobody's going to know the truth of what actually occurred but Norfolk Southern. Our governor's not going to know. Our EPA is not going to know. The fire chief, who they've thrown under the bus several times on this, who made the ultimate decision, metaphorically, they held a loaded gun to his head and said, you're either going to sign off that we're going to blow this car up, or we're going to blow up half of your town.
Gotcha.
So to this day, and I don't know if we'll ever get to the bottom of it, what was the right decision? The other 4 cars were okay. They did not need to go.
Right.
1 car needed to go. So they could have moved it away. You know, I'm hearing a lot of folks that are not from this area because I travel around, and the way that the media and the EPA have framed everything, they all believed that all 5 cars were in trouble, and it was only 4 cars. And remember, by Sunday, the fires were mostly out. So these cars, the fires that you were seeing were the safety relief valves that were popping off, doing like they're supposed to. When them vapors hit the air, there's flame there. Boom, they light off, and they go back until the pressure rises again. They release. So they could have, in my opinion, maybe moved those cars safely out of the way, and just, if they had to blow one up, was just one.
Right. And I think some of the initial reports and the initial ask was to potentially just light one of them, and then at the last minute they're like, actually, let's do 5, and then that decision had to be made again, like you're saying. Yeah,
so that literally just came out. I heard this in
it was the last couple days, I feel like.
Well, in the Senate.
Okay.
The Senate hearing is where that came out, because
that's where I heard that.
Gosh, I can't remember. He's
the emergency manager, or the we'll
from
put
Darlington.
His name in. Yes,
from Darlington.
We'll make sure we put his name in here so that folks can look up who it was.
Absolutely, because you could tell through that hearing how disgusted he was.
Yes,
he feels. I personally believe he knows a lot more about it than I do, from the chemical side, the hazardous waste material side, than I do. And just his body language alone gave it away to me that there's a lot more to the story that we're not being told.
Absolutely. So obviously that's the initial kind of setting on fire of all of this stuff for the uncontrolled burn, the explosion, whatever you want to call it at this point. And then at that point, town's evacuated for roughly 3 days. And then folks are told, yep, it's safe to go back, after they watched what we saw in drone footage from some of this, and in photographs from quite a ways away. I mean, the cloud from this thing was massive and was definitely not contained just over East Palestine, and sent who knows what all over the area. So that starts to happen. And, a week or so goes by, and lots of questions start being asked about what are the effects from what's in the air with all of this? What is it that folks need to be concerned about in East Palestine now, and in these surrounding communities where, I mean, it's not like it's contained over the city limits. The wind blows. This stuff went way up into the sky. What kind of questions were you starting to ask next, and what were your next concerns that you began kind of looking into here?
So the day of the explosion, I got sick. So the Saturday after the explosion, it would have been, so I wasn't sick at that point. The day of the explosion, I drove almost into East Palestine. You crossed the bridge on the way over here. There's a railroad bridge that goes up. There was about 5 of us sitting on that bridge watching this thing go up. Within 10 minutes of that, the mushroom cloud that we all seen, that product started coming our way. There was a horse farm like right there, or some stables, and that cloud was already starting to settle heavily down. So going back to the first couple of days of the products of combustion, what I was worried about, now I see this heavy carbon-filled, who knows what soup coming down. So then I really started looking into, okay, what chemicals, what products could have been created. Through that, some of the websites and Substacks that I read had linked me to Eric Coppolino. So Eric Coppolino, I cannot remember the day that he came out and says, oh my gosh, it's not everything else that you need to worry about, it's dioxins. So with that, Eric had a very good elementary education on dioxins, how dangerous they are, how they're created, so on and so forth, and that was the rabbit hole that I just jumped down.
Right.
So from that point, I really started focusing on these dioxins. I checked into his credentials. This man has been doing this for over 30 years. Love Canal, Times Beach, Missouri. He had an incident that happened at his college dorm room. And this is what brought him to this. So with that being said, did all my homework on that, and then wanted to start educating the town on the dangers that we're facing from what they did to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And while I was in town the last time, the dioxin conversation was really started to get out there more and more too. I was at a town hall in East Palestine, and Stephen Lester was there, and he talked a lot about dioxins there. And for a lot of residents in that room, that was their first time hearing about it. So everyone has like a person that, and unfortunately, like folks like you kind of started talking about it. Folks like the one you just mentioned were talking about it, and people in that room were very concerned. That was a really informative event for folks. They got to ask questions of some of these experts, and I mean, you literally have families in there, a father holding a baby, being like, how do I clean this in my home? How can I do this? And meanwhile, they're, up until that point, Norfolk Southern is offering, oh, we've got a cleaning company who can come to your home, and we did some digging into that, and it's like, the cleaning company is coming into your home and spraying chemicals for germs to clean bacteria and viruses that would have zero effect on dioxin in your home or any of the other byproducts of burned vinyl chloride. Correct me if I'm wrong on some of this, but I've looked into several of the other byproducts and talked to some experts as well. Some of the other byproducts are formaldehyde, you've got hydrogen chloride, you've got phosgene. This cleaner isn't going to do anything for those, and those three chemicals that I just mentioned, if you can smell them, you're already above the limit that you should be breathing it as far as OSHA guidelines go. I mean...
100%. So back to that original town hall. That night, while I was waiting in line, I was screaming from the top of my lungs, dioxins, folks. Everybody needs to pay attention to dioxins. So at the town hall...
and this is the first town hall. We weren't here yet for that, I think. So this is the very first
first town hall. So... at near the end of the event, I screamed out dioxins twice. So the very first Ohio EPA gentleman, the guy that's in charge of the creeks, I can't remember his name, I screamed out, they were cleaning out, we're cleaning the creeks, everything is fine. I said, what about dioxins? His face went pale white. He says, that's not me, that's the federal. The federal pointed to him, and then they glossed right over this. So...
Wow.
About a half hour, 35 minutes later, one of the federal responder EPA guys was up there. Again, a lady, she's a very strong voice, and I'm so sorry I don't know her name, but she stood up, and they kept saying, everybody's fine, everybody's fine. She jumped up and said, if everybody's getting sick, how can everything be fine if everything's getting sick? And then she mentioned the particulate as well, and I'm like, yes, okay, we got somebody on that. So he started mentioning the particulate, and I screamed out again. Nobody's addressing the elephant in the room, and now I have his attention. And I said, when you burn a chlorinated compound, do they or do they not create dioxins? And he says, yes. However, I don't want to get too technical here, and I'm like, we're not getting too technical. Right. You just admitted that when you burn a chlorinated compound, you create dioxins, and we burn a bunch of it. So I feel like that at that point, there was still media there, and people started paying attention. So the very next day, I had the opportunity to go on Neil Cavuto, and I did the same thing. And again, there's no way for us to 100% prove that these were made, but it's not up to me to prove it. It's up to the EPA and the powers that be to prove to us that they weren't. So I asked that night after the meeting had let down. I had the entire EPA delegation in front of me, and I went over there and just started drilling them about this. I'm like, look, what is the spread? I don't know. For every ounce of chlorinated compound it burns, how many dioxins are created? They could not answer me any of these questions. And I'm like, how can you guys sit here and tell us that everything's fine when not a one of you can answer these questions that I'm asking? You guys don't even know. So in other words, you guys, nobody performed a risk assessment prior to them making this decision. How can that be? How in the world can it be when you have the EPA who knows everything about this? If you go to their website, a lot of the information I got was directly from the EPA's website and WHO. A risk assessment had to have been performed before they decided to do this.
And it's not like there was it was set on fire and 4 hours later then they did the controlled burn. There were 3 days in between that this got some media attention. The federal government was aware. Any and every resource should have been made available to them. And if it was asked for, I'm sure it would have been made available to them to be able to do that risk assessment. And clearly it wasn't done, or it was done and they ultimately decided to do it. I don't know. It seems like the one wasn't done.
It absolutely wasn't. So I didn't give credit to where credit's due. It's Sil Caggiano, who is a former fire chief out of Youngstown, Ohio, who is a hazardous materials expert. So I believe it was Sunday night. He came out and he was the one that said, hey, with all this stuff burning, there's furans that could be created. He was talking about the products of combustion that I didn't understand. So when I heard the furans, I said, okay. So that's kind of what led me down the rabbit hole of, okay, there's a lot worse things, which then led me into Eric Coppolino, which led me into this, which then brought the whole full circle the night at the town hall. From there, I just been focused on trying to get answers that unfortunately nobody's given us.
No, for sure. And it's tough. I'm this is our second trip back. Even in between, I've been staying in touch with residents literally every single day. Anytime something small happens, even I get a text message from usually not one, but 3 or 4 people being like, so-and-so just did this or that. And unfortunately checking in with residents who are still getting sick or still feeling sick. Their symptoms haven't necessarily gone away. Some of them in particular, where they stayed in town in between the time of the derailment up until they decided to do the controlled burn, and they were told that it was fine as long as they kind of stayed in their house. And when ultimately it was time to leave, they were coughing like crazy, having a hard time breathing. We've got people who've been diagnosed with types of bronchitis. We've had residents who I've spoken with who live on Clark Street with the train tracks in their backyard. Her and her child ended up in the hospital needing nebulizer treatments, and they'd never had breathing issues before. Not to mention folks who are elderly or already had issues, and this is just exacerbating them even more. I guess what have your thoughts been now? We're now at the phase where during all of this, Norfolk Southern buried a lot of the contaminants underneath the tracks. Again, it seems like the time to get rid of it would have been then, instead of burying it and then needing to now dig them all up and potentially recontaminate the air, the water, all of this sort of stuff. But that's what's happening as we speak, basically. What are your thoughts now on them having to dig all this up and the potential safety concerns for residents who are still staying in town? Some are being offered the ability to leave. Others are having a harder time getting some of that assistance. It seems like we're kind of opening a whole another can of worms again for this process that's going to take weeks to clean.
It's not seems, it absolutely is happening. So I was one of those ones that got sick as well. So Wednesday night from that town hall. So this is the days after. I was knocking on doors and talking to folks and explaining to them what I knew. So the property, my income property, is right at East Martin and Pleasant, literally 500 feet away from the derailment. So we are the closest houses to this. So I was on the street talking to all the neighbors out there, telling them, guys, it's not safe to be here. There's this, there's that, the dioxins, the gases that you're smelling, the same thing that they're telling you that, oh, it's safe because you smell it. If you smell it, you're above the threshold. There's time-weighted averagers. There's a lot of things that go into this. So with that being said, that Saturday, the EPA and CTEC came to my house to deem it safe. They were not ready for me when they showed up. I understand all this gas analyzation. I understand PIDs, photoionization detectors. I understand all this equipment. And I'm like, look, the products that you're looking for are long gone. You know, you're not going to find anything in my house. But with that being said, the house that I own is on a crawl space. So the furnace and everything is in that crawl space. They would not take their meter down into the crawl space. They get, I gotta be careful because I don't want to get the EPA lady in trouble, but she let me take the meter in just a little bit. And of course, they get fresh air blowing this way, you're not gonna find it. Now, inside the house, they found 640 parts per billion was their high reading. They were getting all kinds of VOC readings inside my house. Now, below the 1 part per million, which I didn't know, they would not tell me. I'm like, what's the threshold? You're finding it, but they would not tell me what it is. So,
and I will say too, because I did a little bit of investigation into the PIDs, as well as I've got a stack of residents' home tests, and basically every single one of them, the results will just say less than 0.1 ppm VOCs. We're doing like a broad VOC test too, which is
correct.
Seems to be not the right thing if you're trying to. You should be testing for specific chemicals that you would know are there, rather than doing this broad VOC test where there's a lot of room for error, and experts that I'm talking to about this too, where sure, it might pick up some of the chemicals that were on board the train, but again, not the byproducts when they're set on fire. When you set this stuff on fire, if you're testing for vinyl chloride, you're not going to find vinyl chloride. But are you testing for formaldehyde? Are you testing for some of these other things? And I know with formaldehyde in particular, with the PIDs, you need a special attachment to be able to do a test for formaldehyde, and you can't do the test for the VOCs while you also have that attachment on. It's one or the other. And it seems like, and maybe you can talk more about this, it seems like they were doing it without this formaldehyde attachment. And again, that's just one of the chemicals, right? I'm not saying that that's like the end-all be-all, but if you can smell formaldehyde, it's already above the approved levels by OSHA. If you can smell phosgene, it's above the approved levels by OSHA. It's also unclear if this device would even pick up phosgene at all as well. Yeah.
No, phosgenes would not be picked up by the analyzers that they had. So they had this high reading. The ladies were talking back and forth, like scratching their heads. Uh-oh, why are we getting this reading? It should not be that high. The officer that was with them told me, he goes, hey, this is the first house that we picked up anything in. So what the ladies ended up doing was it was in one area of the bedroom that had that 640 parts per billion, and they did what they I call it the Draeger tube test. So that's what you're talking about. It's a long tube, glass tube that goes into a hand pump. A vacuum pump is the most accurate, which I asked them, are you using a vacuum pump or a hand pump? And if they don't crack those tubes correctly and seat them correctly into the pump, it's not going to get good. So a good indication. But what they did was they popped that Draeger tube, they went to that one area, and you have to pump this thing 10 times, and they checked and said, great news, there's no vinyl chloride here, you're fine. So I was like, whoa, wait a minute, I still have VOCs, and they were like, well, we're trying to figure that out. So they came, they did the analyzation, less than 1 part per million, and they wrote on there, VOCs, low detection of VOCs indicated. They called it, it's a Draeger tube, they called it something else. Vinyl chloride test, non-detected, high VOC readings because of smoke in the house. Now, my tenant has only been in that house for less than 2 months.
Right.
There is an ashtray sitting outside the door that's clear full. She doesn't smoke in the house.
Right.
Now, smoke carries on clothes and goes in there.
Sure.
I have a high affinity for smelling cigarettes. I know if somebody's burning one and they weren't in there.
Right.
Right? But that was how C-Tech
Right.
got around actually telling me that there was something bad in the house.
I've also seen on other people's reports, it'll say like, there's like 1 or 2 reports where I've seen it measured at 0.2 parts per million for VOCs. And they said, oh, the resident recently painted their attic. Or the resident, and it's like, if you're doing that broad test, that could pick something up like that.
Sure.
Why don't you do a different test? Do some more specific tests for the chemicals, again, that you should know are present when this is happening.
So what I did was I went outside. So you can go to that house right now, and there is particulate and chemical on my siding, my windows, the whole 9 yards. I took a napkin, wiped it, took it over to her analyzer. I said, check this. She pulled it back. She says, no. She said, you can't do that. And I'm like, you have a filter on the end.
Right.
Tell me what's in this. We're
Right.
not doing outside samples. So the positive of that day was I was drilling the EPA lady. She grabbed my hand and she says, you are not wrong in the questions that you're asking. If you can't get your answers, honey, the best thing that I can tell you is keep your foot on the accelerator and keep asking. And that's what I've done ever since.
And I think that that's unfortunately what folks like you and other folks that I've been talking with are going to have to keep doing, because it doesn't seem like the cavalry's coming to come provide you with those answers. The squeaky wheel gets the grease is something I've heard a million people say since I've been here, because, okay, you're not getting the money for relocation. If I start causing a scene about it, I'll get the money. You're not getting someone to come do the appropriate tests in your house. So you're going to have to just go and continuously bug the people who have the authority to do these things to be able to get it. That is absolutely not how this should be being handled, obviously. The fact that the federal government hasn't come in and like taken over and been like, anyone who wants to leave, we're gonna get the money from Norfolk Southern later to cover it, because like frankly that's who should be paying for all of it. But the federal government should absolutely be stepping in, making sure that these people can relocate for as long as they need to. If they want to sell their homes, they should be able to sell their homes if they feel uncomfortable. So many of these people that I'm talking to are concerned about going to their house. They're like, I'm in there and I feel like I'm going to get sick again. I feel like, especially for these people who live right on the train tracks, I feel for them. I mean, imagine listening to trains go by on basically every hour all night after having just lived through this. It's insane. I won't keep you too much longer. I guess, is there anything else that you'd want to share with folks from outside of the area? And actually, I want to ask you too. I know you've been working with Alex and others with that organization. You can talk a little bit about the work that you all are trying to do there.
Yes, so sure. So how I got connected with United for East Palestine was going back to the Dioxin thing, Eric Coppolino. I did not realize that the first time that I talked to him, he recorded our conversation, right? So Eric was like, holy cow, this guy needs to get out there. So Eric shared our recorded conversation with Alex. Alex then reached out to me and said, hey, I think that we could use you over here to help organize. So with that being said, right away, that was on a Saturday. Sunday, I was watching ABC News this morning, and Dr. Andy Welton was on there, and Dr. Andy Welton was saying the exact same things as me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the guy that we need. Alex reached out to me on Tuesday and said, Aaron, can you get on a Zoom call with Dr. Welton? And I'm like, I know this guy, absolutely. Yeah. Now, at this time, extremely sick. That's when I went into that crawl space to change the furnace filter, I'm almost 100% convinced I got nailed with something. I ended up flat on my back, ended up going to the doctor and had severe chemical bronchitis, severe chemical sinusitis, and I'm 47 years old, had never had to be on a nebulizer or a breathing treatment, and had to do that. So I was very, very sick, but met with Dr. Welton via Zoom. He says, Aaron, we want to come out and we can do the soil sampling. We can do all the things that you're asking us to do, but we need money.
Right.
You know, we need money to come do these things. he goes, guys, you think you can get us like 150 signatures? And we said yes. So Alex and Jenna and the United for East Palestine team made a web-based form, and I took a bunch of paper forms, and I said, you know what? I'm going to go hit the ground. I'm going to start knocking on doors, and that's what I did. At the Aaron Brockovich show, I ended up getting, I wasn't in the main event, so I was in the hall where nobody could hear. I'm sitting there talking to residents because I have a stack of paperwork, and everybody's like, who are you, and why you got this stack of paperwork? So I stood up and said, well, so that would have been Thursday. Dr. Welton reached back out to us and said, Aaron, the concerns are too great there for us to wait. I want to come. He goes, you think you can get us 15 wells? And I said, Doc, I won't let you down. So I went to that meeting, stood up and said, introduced myself, said, look, we got Dr. Welton and his team from Purdue University that wants to come and sample 15 wells. Who in here needs their wells sampled? And people were literally crying to me because they're calling these numbers and nobody is responding. And it was like, oh my gosh, finally somebody can come do this. So we did. We ended up getting 6 wells down on 170, headed out towards Negley, who are the most highly susceptible and dangerous wells right now. And then behind me on North Pleasant, that was the way for the first couple of days that the chemical burn was going that way. And after the explosion, the same kind of thing. So I thought, I know all these people, but from knocking on their doors, that they had not had responses. And again, people, I'm in a hurry trying to get people, but they wanted me in their house. They wanted to hear from me because I also was educating these folks on, look, folks, you have to start keeping a diary every single day of every single thing that's happening to you, because these people were also saying headaches, nosebleeds, not feeling well. And I'm like, you got to start documenting that, because if it's not documented, the lawyers are going to tell you it never happened.
Right.
And it's an easy thing, document. If you feel good this day, don't lie about it. And it's the same thing that I've been pushing my resident. So my resident that's in that house does not want to leave. I cannot convince her to leave. And I understand, because she took her 2 years to find a house that she wanted. She finally found her house that she wanted. She was living in the basement with her daughter, helping out. She doesn't want to go back to that. And going back to what you're saying, I don't have anywhere to put her, right? I don't have, my other locations that I have are full. So it's not like I can kick them out to move her in. But Norfolk Southern's not helping. And a toxicologist, I have been calling. I have made 7 calls to toxicologists. I called the county, no response. I've called Norfolk Southern at every single event. I make them take my name and address down. They won't come because they know they're going to have to deem my property uninhabitable. They don't want to deal with it. So for me, I want my tenant out of there because of her health, right? I'm going to lose money. That house is gone to me. And I don't care about that, because that is a monetary, material thing that can be made up. But her health and well-being, absolutely not. So through United for East Palestine, worked with Andy Welton and his team over Saturday and Sunday. What we found, and this is my pure speculation why everybody's getting sick down there, is all this aeration equipment. So they're sucking these poisons out of the creek, aerating it, revolatilizing it, and this is why you're smelling all this crap here and there. Now, how I can quantify that statement is I had a PID in my hand, because Dr. Welton and his team had one. So they're down by the creek sampling. I'm right behind the way station, so right behind downtown. There is they had an aerator there. I'm getting like a steady 170 parts per billion, sometimes a peak of like 200. And I say to Dr. Welton, look, I'm getting this down here. He's like, Aaron, that shouldn't be happening. So that was on Sunday. Dr. Welton made a lot of public statements, a lot of Twitter statements saying, hey, these creeks are highly contaminated. Everybody needs to get out of here. Why is there not signage? That very next Thursday, at the next town hall event they had, the EPA question and answer where no answers were given, but I had the opportunity again to go meet with the EPA folks. So I walk in the hall, and one of the EPA guys remembered me. He says, "Hey, Dioxin guy." He says, "Did you hear that we're going to start testing for dioxins?" I had a hat on. I tipped my hat. I said, "Thank you very much." Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for me, none of this stuff would have even started happening. Not just me, the rest of the residents.
Yeah, if there was no push for I like watched the change in like folks learning about dioxins to that becoming the main driver of conversation. If you all were not talking about dioxins in the way that you were, there's no way there'd be dioxin testing
and the media
now.
picking up.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah.
And the media has done an amazing job with that sense. At every news conference, they're drilling. Mm-hmm. They were the ones really, the residents getting informed and then pushing forward on this is what made the difference. But what I was getting at was, I then talked to him about the aeration equipment. I said, why is there not signage down there? You know, you're revolatilizing this stuff. He's like, how do you know this? I said, look, there was 170 parts per billion that was occurring. He goes, how do you know? I said, because I had a PID in my hand. Mm-hmm. He about shit his pants. He looked at me and I said, there is not an air analyzer anywhere. I said, I looked, why is that not there? Right. You know, you got residents and kids. That day that we were there, it was like a really nice day. Kids are literally playing
it's in the park. The Roadhouse restaurant's right there. Yeah, there's houses, there's a park.
Yes.
I mean,
so the very next day, Purdue sent a follow-up team. Dr. Walton was giving a speech over in London, and he sent a follow-up team to come in, and one of the grad students said to me, he goes, Aaron, did you know that they moved the aerator out of that area and there were signs up? And I said, no kidding, the day before they were there.
Yep.
And again, why is it up to us to have to inform these people? The rest of these residents didn't have the opportunity like I did to work so closely with Dr. Welton and his team and have these PID analyzers in the hand, or maybe not even understanding what they were looking at.
Right.
But again, like I told them, it's not up to me to prove to you that it's there. It's up to you to prove to us that it's not. And, you know, with the independent testing that even was done by Texas A&M, any independent test that we've had done to this point completely contradicts everything that we're being told.
Right.
And unfortunately, it takes money to get these teams here. And I believe that like the EPA and Norfolk Southern, they know this. Where are the Ohio universities? Where are the Ohio universities coming in there and doing this? This goes all back to the corruption of the way everything, the funding and everything is set up. The Ohio universities don't want to step over the governor's edicts that he's coming out with and stating, because it could then affect their funding.
Right.
So really at the end of the day, what I hope folks do is go to United for East Palestine. United for East Palestine has got an amazing group of doctors and scientists right now working to do some high-end AI modeling and data collection using AI to try to determine how far the spread of this burn, all these symptoms and things that folks are having, what the doctors are saying. You know, I don't understand the whole AI. This lady, Devin, that was going, she was like amazing figuring this out. So we got some GoFundMes. Dr. Walton just came out and said that the days that he was here, he's about $25,000 in the hole himself doing this testing.
Right.
So we have some GoFundMes. We have some things out there. We need a little bit of help to get this third-party advice that we really need here.
For sure, and we'll make sure that there's a link to all of that in the description of this video if anyone is interested in learning more about United for East Palestine or potentially donating to one of the causes involved here. Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time. We'll definitely stay in touch.
Yes,
Your wealth of information, so we appreciate it. We're here on the ground again. Right now we're in New Waterford, one town over from East Palestine. If you're not already subscribed to us on YouTube, this is your first time seeing us, definitely hit the subscribe button down below there, like the video, share the video. Getting this stuff out there is super important. Thank you guys for watching. We appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I really appreciate it.